Greetings and welcome back. I am joined by the esteemed, based, and famed Colttaine for a very a very pertinent discussion, I think, in light of general trends that have been ongoing, I'd say, for at least 2 or 3 years on YouTube. And the focal point of our discussion, it is intended to be at least the focal point, is the difference in focus on macro problems versus micro problems. And before we get into it, I just want to give a little bit of talk about my own sort of background in this, as it were, this issue. I want to cite a very concrete example before proceeding. I'm sure Colttaine can relate in some sense. So going back to 2015, when the so-called migrant crisis became an issue, and with these insane open borders policies and anyone can come in, something that everyone knows, I don't think open borders is a good idea. I think immigration should be pretty strict and regulated. In addition to everyone's favorite religion, I'm not a huge fan of Islam, everyone knows. I very vocally made videos about these issues. I talked about it. But there came a point after worrying about these things, and I still don't like any of it. I don't like open borders, and I don't like Islam particularly, that I realized there wasn't much I could do about it. It sounds like an obvious realization, obviously, but yeah. And so I increasingly began to not think too much about it because there's only so much one can do as a lone individual. I think that might be a good starting point for, say, a specific macro problem, because most people who I think are sensible don't think open borders are a good idea, or that a wide-scale presence of Islam is a good idea in Europe. But nonetheless, what you can do as an individual is fairly limited. And so it holds true, I would maintain, for a whole host of rather pernicious issues affecting the entirety of not just the Western world, but civilization itself. And on that note, I will hand over the podium to Colttaine. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, I would say, even to the extent that the individual does have a say in what happens with large-scale policy like immigration policy through the democratic process, this is something that I've spoken about in my videos before. The democratic process doesn't really work quite the way a lot of people seem to think it does, like your vote counts and all of that. If I can find it and send you the link, it might be worth putting in the description for this video. But I remember reading a study that was done by Harvard University that basically examined, it looked at the political policies that were implemented and then compared, like it did like a regression on the impact of voting versus political lobby, special interest groups, and large political like donations to parties and stuff. It essentially found that voter influence accounted for less than 10% of political outcomes. So even to the extent that you do have a say in the democratic process, it doesn't count for jack shit. It's like it's less than 10%.
Yeah, well, that's an interesting study, and I think even anecdotally, one often gets the feeling that voter participation, it's more of a kind of show one puts on to feel good about oneself. I remember growing up in the United States with tales of sort of civic duty and obligations to vote because such opportunities are denied elsewhere in the world. And whilst that's a noble sentiment, I don't know how consequential it is.
Well, it's actually a huge faux pas in here in Australia. It's actually
illegal.
It's actually illegal not to vote. I am a conscientious objector. I prefer to cop the fine and pay my $50 fine than take part in the sham. But when I tell people that, I get some horrified looks. People in Australia, if you basically say I don't vote, it's not like in America where you're just like, you don't feel like going down to the voting booth or whatever. Like, to actually not do it in Australia is a huge social faux pas.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I mean, of course, in the United States, it doesn't carry. There's nothing illegal about not voting, but certainly from the older generations, the idea that if you don't vote, that you're almost doing a disservice to the rest of the world, where people don't have opportunities to vote.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I don't know how it is in America, but here in Australia, the right to vote is often Australia is actually a very nationalistic country, very big on things like Anzac Day, and voting, the right to vote is often linked to... No. Right. Anzac Day.
Yeah, I know.
Which is... for anyone that doesn't know, the Anzacs were the Australian New Zealand Army Corps, and Anzac Day celebrates the day, I believe the day that they withdrew from Gallipoli, the Gallipoli Peninsula.
I believe you're correct from what I recall. I was kidding about the invasion thing.
No, I know. I'm just saying to anyone in the audience that isn't aware.
Right.
But the democratic process is often linked to the sacrifice of Australian military men. You know, these men died for your right to freedom and democracy and all of that, which I don't think is the case. If you look at like that World War One in particular, we had no skin in the game. Australia wasn't under attack. It was essentially we were sending young boys over to fight for the good of the mother country, Britain. It really, it's. But that's, I mean, I'm just saying that's the country that I'm living in. Is very, very nationalistic. If you don't vote, it can be taken as a slur against the sacrifice of military men.
Yeah, I mean, that type of rhetoric is sometimes brought up in the United States. But the rhetoric, again, I'm most familiar with having grown up as a child there, was certainly that there are millions, if not billions, of people in the world that are not afforded these opportunities and so on and so forth. But to that, I would say, if in fact research bears this out effectively, that it has very little impact, I don't really see the point. And furthermore, even if you do vote somebody in, say in the case of the United States, a president or some important elected official, there's always the distinct and even likely possibility that the things that you want done will not be done. There will be hindrance. I mean, I just don't...
Brexit. Just look at Brexit.
Yeah,
they had a fucking referendum. That's not going to happen. They're already I asked Tilda about this the other day, because I'm like, I've heard talk about a second do-over referendum, and Tilda basically said, I wouldn't be surprised if it goes ahead, because the government have made it very clear they don't want to do it. They literally had a plebiscite to leave the EU, and it's more and more, it's looking like that isn't even going to happen.
This is par for the course. In the early 2000s, there was this matter of the so-called Lisbon Treaty, or the EU Constitution, and there were several countries. I think Ireland was the biggest one. I think they voted against at least twice, if not three times, outright. And they didn't care. They just kept on pushing it and pushing it. So I think we're living in an era of what I would call democratic mythology, in that there's an idea that your vote counts, but or your participation counts. But yeah, I mean, the voices on Brexit were clear. And I don't want to go too much in the nitty-gritty, but it's clear that Theresa May was not really fully on board with following through. It was good that Cameron got out when he did, because
I don't think that's from what I've seen. I don't think that's the case. I think Theresa May had the intention of following through with it. I think there was a lot of loud opposition to her within the party, and I think she made the fucking mistake of calling a general election that she called? Yeah, she shouldn't have done that. She shouldn't have done that when she did, because that was just threw a fucking spanner in the wrench of actually getting stuff done.
Yeah. So I mean, this just goes to show that there isn't very much to be done when it comes to politics.
Yeah.
And
well, I mean, and And that, like, keep in mind, that's the actual democratic voting system. That's not even getting into the pie in the sky sort of stuff where, if I was controller of the universe and I could rewrite civilization from the ground up to suit my ideals. Like, this is like, I guess, for instance, I'll start off with, white nationalism and the alt-right, right? Even assuming that I agreed with everything they said, they're never going to get their ethno-state. Like, it's like the democratic process that we have now, where you apparently have input into what happens, doesn't really work. You're not going to be able to rewrite America from the ground up as a white ethno-state. Not going to happen. And it goes for a lot of the other things as well, like the quote-unquote solutions. Like, civilization isn't going to turn around and tomorrow and suddenly care about men. So, like, the MRAs aren't going to get their way. Like, the traditionalists, where they're like, oh, we just need to get back to traditional values where, people stay in marriages and don't divorce. And it's like, well, okay, let's, destroy the internet and social media and get rid of birth control. And
we can get into those details in a bit, but I see where you're going with this. And a final point on the political stuff. A lot of people are not as outspoken as I am, or just on the ground, so-called normies. I think the vast majority of people in Europe don't want mass third world immigration. I also think the vast majority, well, maybe I'm not as sure on this, don't think it's great to have mosques popping up all over major urban centers, even in towns in some places. Because Islam carries with it problems, and it doesn't seem to be very congruent with any tradition, with the majority of the traditions in the West. And yet, it's business as usual. These things continue. I am not going to... Well, I don't have hair. But if I did have hair, I would not be pulling my hair out over this anymore. Even though it upsets me to a degree, and it always will upset me. I think righteous anger has a use, but I'd rather do something with myself. Increasingly, I've made it my task in recent weeks to find some kind of semi-permanent solution or aid in my chronic insomnia. As you know, I've seen endocrinologists, and if need be, I will see other types of doctors, neurophysio. I will look for some kind. I'd rather work on that issue than worry about the Islamification in the West. And to a lot of people, that sounds like a quote-unquote cucky position, but
well, it's reality.
Yeah, pretty much. You can spend, and here's the other thing that I've noticed with this obsession with macro problems, and it's not that I don't recognize them. Obviously, I do. I recognize all sorts of macro problems. My channel was founded on the observation and recognition of one specific macro problem, or a set of them interrelated. Is that it's a lot easier to get on the internet or get on a podium and wail and caterwault the world about problems that are effectively insoluble versus, frankly speaking, making change to your own life, which is not to say that you can always make changes. If you're a paraplegic, obviously you're not going to be getting up and running a marathon. But I just think that increasingly I am much more focused inwards in the things that I directly worry about and concern me. I don't, for whatever time I have left on Earth, I want it to be a reasonably healthy time. I'm more concerned with that than there are many problems going on, and I think it's a healthier focus than all of this. Frankly speaking, it's gotten to the point where it's just whinging. So,
well, it's the thing I see is like, a lot of these people, and I've said this in my recent video, like, what, Colttaine never offers solutions, and it's like, well, like, how do you come up with a solution to these things? It's like,
the Messiah?
Nobody else. Well, yeah, it's like nobody else has solutions to these. Like I said, like the alt-right and white nationalism, like, even if I agreed with them, they're ethno-states wishful thinking. It's not a feasible solution. men's rights activism. People aren't going to suddenly care about men. Like in the video, I pointed out that the like male circumcision is at the moment in the West only seriously looking at being outlawed in like Iceland and Denmark, which are incredibly feminist countries. I don't think they give a shit about men. Like they're not doing it because they suddenly care about the rights of men and boys. It's because I think that they don't want to be seen to be, as social justice warriors, they don't want to be seen to be hypocrites. But there is no, there are all the, you don't have a solution. Nobody has a solution. There is no solution to the macro problem. The world is the way it is. The only thing you really can change is your own sort of behavior. And it's a fucking terrible cliche, but it's true. Be the change that you want to see in the world, right?
Be the change you want to be. Yeah. Well, sure, and I think that pragmatically that's the only thing that can be done. In some sense, the world is a continuous and consistent macro problem, and there are people who work in groups and coalitions that try to address these things, nominally at least, but I don't think the lone individual can do much, and I think it can drive you nigh insane worrying too much about all these things. And increasingly I guess you could say somewhat apathetic about these things. I don't like what's going on, but I want to work more on, in my specific case, on improving my health and looking for some kind of at least partial solution to a long-standing medical condition. I just can't be bothered anymore thinking about this other stuff. And when I was younger, I was much more, I think young people in general, they tend to be more engaged with this sort of thing. But if
young
the world,
people are idealistic, yeah.
Yeah. But the world itself is a macro problem. And, I mean, this is also a cliche by now to bring up Thomas Sowell, right? But he said,
there are no solutions.
There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs, and this is a universal. Anytime you implement something, there's going to be a good to. Well, there could be just more bad, but there's usually a good aspect to it and a bad aspect to it, and then you have to somehow reconcile those. And what people love to do is to latch on the negatives. And I think this is a good point of departure into some of these things. For example, on the matter of traditionalism and all the issues that afflict us in modernity, I think many of the issues that people talk about, think about, feel passionate about, are issues that are a byproduct of all those things that you could sum up as modernity, be it birth control, the internet, telecommunications, the imagery we're exposed to, Hollywood, you name it, right? But the question you always have, and I said this publicly, I've had this private discussions as well on Discord servers with people who approach this, I think, in a lunatic fashion. They want to get back to some traditional utopia. Well, you could do that. The people of the world can make a concerted effort just to mass destroy technology. And as sure as the sun tends to rise in the morning, over time you would see environmental adaptation because human apes adapt to their environment, and something that's more in line with the traditional setup, because you wouldn't have modern plumbing, you wouldn't have the internet, you wouldn't have modern medicine. And so women would probably end up towing the line and being quote-unquote dutiful and obedient of their husbands and what have you. But the question you want to ask there is, do you want to destroy all of that? And I'm not sure, actually. I don't know. I personally, I profit from a modern medical perspective more, and just the type of technology we enjoy, more than I would going back, say, 200 years and destroying it all. That's my own perspective.
Well, I mean, that's essentially my perspective as well. Is like, and this is one of the reasons why I'm like, take the rights of women away to vote. I'm like, I question how much that would actually do, given that you're still going to have social media and birth control and all of these things. I mean, we can go back to traditionalism, pre-feminism, but it means destroying a lot of the things. Like if feminism particularly third wave feminism, if that's dependent on things like Web 2.0 and social media, you can't solve that problem without getting rid of the technology that allowed that to grow. So I guess you essentially have to come up, like you have to weigh up the values. Does the good that the internet does outweigh the bad of ideological feminism or whatever? Like you can't really have one without the other.
Yeah, and there's another thing that people don't often talk about, but it's the concept of once the toothpaste has escaped the toothpaste tube, it's exceedingly, it's a metaphor obviously, but it's almost impossible to get the toothpaste back in the tube. And many of these things you could even acknowledge as problematic. Just because something worked at some point in time, it doesn't mean we can necessarily go back to that. So, for example, I as much as I deplore, I think there are many negative effects of the welfare state across society, particularly in the United States. We know for a fact, for example, according to data that have been produced primarily by conservative and libertarian thinkers, but I think it's still valid, whatever your position on the political axis might be, that black communities were more successful, enjoyed overall greater health, psychological, economic, etc., without the welfare state. But we're at a stage now that it's almost unthinkable that a politician might platform on some kind of welfare repeal, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think toothpaste is out of the tube.
Well, I would say not only is the toothpaste out of the tube, but I mean, look at where we're heading in the next 20 years. Most of the articles I've read on the situation have essentially said that in the next 20 to 30 years, 50% of jobs that we have now are going to be basically redundant, replaced with automation. Where are those people going to go? Like,
well, this is I recently listened.
Well, the thing is, like, I watch some of these libertarian guys, and like I've read Atlas Shrugged, and that, I mean, you've read that, you love that book, right? Like,
hold your horses there, Colttaine. Love. When I was a youth, when I was a young man, I was somewhat entranced by quote unquote objectivism. It doesn't mean I love the book. I just think the speech is it's cool. It's cool. I'm not saying it's correct. It's just cool.
But there's that point in the book, right, where the lights are going out across the city, and there's the guy, I can't remember his name, but he's
John Galt.
Dying. No, John Galt was the guy giving the big monologue. The guy.
Dagny Taggart.
Right hand man, and he was on some train that broke down in the middle of nowhere, and he's essentially, at the end of the book, he's essentially in the middle of nowhere, dying of thirst, on this broken down train. And it's just like, to me, I see that, and it's like, a lot of these libertarian guys have this mentality that, all of these useless people are just going to willingly lay down and die when this happens. No, it's going to be the fucking zombie apocalypse. Like, if I was starving, I would literally kill people for a loaf of bread. I would do that.
Well, I'm not as confident. I would like to think I would maintain some sort of comportment and sense of principles and not murder people, unlike you.
If it came down to my survival versus them, I would do what I had to do to survive. And I think a lot of people would have that mentality.
Many people would. I don't know if I would. I hope I wouldn't, but yes.
The point is, when 50% of the workforce over the next 20 years is going to be made redundant by automation, where are these fucking people going to go?
Well, on this particular issue, this is very important. We're effectively talking about UBI. I was listening to, increasingly I've been convinced by arguments for the necessity of, you could say, UBI. I was listening to a conversation between a guy named Andrew Yang and Sam Harris. He had a conversation about an hour long. And this guy, Andrew Yang, who was born into, you could say, good cognitive genes and a good environment, spent the last 10 years touring the Midwest, and particularly the United States, and all these jobs being displaced. And yes, these people, I think the number he cited was 30%, but that's still huge in terms of the United States at least. This is a problem, and it's going to need some kind of redress.
Yeah.
Of some form.
Like I'm not saying like, and this is one of the big problems where, like, I face this a lot because I look at this stuff and I say the things I do, and people are like, Colttaine's a leftist, like socialist statist, and I'm like, I'm not necessarily saying that I morally think it's a good idea. I'm not saying that I think it's a morally good thing, but I guess if you were gonna, like, I don't really subscribe to the political right or left. Like, it depends on the issue. Like, I'm right on left, like right on some issues, left on others. If you were going to describe me, I would probably fall into the area of like realpolitik. I'm not saying I like it, but it's just practically what's probably going to happen.
UBI, yes.
Yeah.
I think increasingly I'm being convinced by I also find on this particular front the analogy to the Industrial Revolution, it's actually a disanalogy. I don't think just because we got over the Industrial Revolution, people were able to find work and the Luddites were effectively around, that this time it's going to be different.
This is actually something that me and our late friend Adam Jensen used to disagree on a lot. Because he used to be very much, we got through the Industrial Revolution, people will retrain. Like, in the Industrial Revolution, a farmer went from driving a plough horse to driving a tractor. A secretary went from shorthand to typewriter, and then to, computer word processor. But with the invention of things like Siri, the very job of secretary is being replaced. Same thing. Like, once, like, you got a plough horse and then you've got a tractor, both of which require a farmer to drive them. When you have like automated harvesting machines that actually harvest the crops and drive themselves using like GPS positioning, the farmer's not going to be able to retrain as a robotics engineer.
Yeah, and this is something that Mr. Yang, this Andrew Yang character, was pointed out, maybe it was Sam Harris or both, that the type of transition that's going to take place is a transition to extremely cognitively demanding tasks. And my point I've made repeatedly for the past 2 years, I think if this isn't the greatest issue that we face, it's hard to say which is, it's one of the great issues, is this giant cognitive divide. IQ deniers abound, and yet it's not exactly clear to me if somebody who has the faculties to drive a truck will be able to become a software engineer or something akin to that for retraining.
Yeah, and then like when you look at some of that stuff, it's like there's software engineers and then there's software engineers. Like, I'm not a dumb guy. I'm not necessarily Mensa material.
You're a god amongst men.
Well, I'm in the 95th percentile or thereabouts, which means I fall short of Mensa. I know a lot of programming languages, like I know C++ and JavaScript and PHP and a bunch of other things, Python. But here's the thing, right? I've written... I like to dabble with a lot of stuff. And I have actually dabbled with neural networks and I understand the basic concepts of neurons and perceptrons and things like that, and I have followed some tutorials to write a basic back-propagated neural network in C++, and I've like, genetic algorithms and stuff, and I've gotten them to work following these tutorials, but even I struggle getting beyond that. Like, I'm certainly not a guy that knows how to, like, I understand the basics of how Google's Deep Dream and image recognition software works, but I am, as not to toot my own horn, but
I will toot your horn for you.
Well, as smart as I am probably not smart enough to be on Google's artificial intelligence team and work on things like Google Deep Dream. And that's the kind of like machine learning systems that are going to be in these, like automated driving taxis and stuff.
Well,
like
on this,
I'm not a dumb guy, and I'm probably not qualified to be an engineer on these projects.
At some point in time, when I was more involved, and I'm not really that involved anymore, but the translation industry, there was always a skepticism expressed, and yet the algorithms are improving for machine translation, and it's just more cost effective over time. And to be, to be a translator, well, in air quotes, anyone can be one. Although to be a good one is a whole other story. You need to actually have brains and things like that. Humans won't be able to compete with that. I think that.
I mean, as an example on that note, like on my video, what was it called? Equal contribution.
Yes,
there was an article at the end where I don't know where it was from, Sweden, Norway, one of those countries. There was an article that I translated through Google, and I actually noticed that it had made some translation errors. Like it said something about the welfare state collapsing, which was a translation error. Like it was, but the fact is that it did a good enough job of translating that I could read the article and very easily understand what was going on. It wasn't perfect, but it was good enough.
And I think it's a matter of time as these things improve, based on my own preliminary observations as somebody who used to be involved in that industry, that'll change. And this is the issue that we're facing, as you pointed out, with the tractor or the plow transition. If you're saying, and I agree with you that you're certainly smarter than I am, in most regards at least, that you cannot...
Debatable.
It depends on the area, but I would say in the areas that actually affect modernity, you're much smarter than I am. And so if you're not in a position to take on the burden of being that software engineer, how is some Joe Smith who drives a truck going to be able to do that? The reality is that we will be hit by reality. I think the IQ cognitive divide deniers are going to be smacked in the face by that shovel, that reality shovel, because it's going to become abundantly clear that not everyone can be a programmer, not everyone can be an astrophysicist, not everyone can become a chemical engineer working in pharmaceuticals. I mean, it's not happening. Most people fall within that mean, and that mean is not going to allow for these types of activities.
Yeah, well, I've mentioned it in quite an old video that it's already becoming a problem in the area of like mechanics, where like it used to be back in the day that you have your regular cars and then you have like your Rolls Royces and stuff that have to be taken to special, like I've worked on Rolls Royces. One of my friend's dads had a Rolls Royce Silver Shadow 2, and it had this fucking horrible system where it had a hydraulic brake system that was connected to the hydraulic suspension system. So to bleed the car, you had to change the hydraulic fluid, you had to bleed it from like 12 different points at once. Horrible car to work on, but if you actually took it to Rolls-Royce, you'd have a team of like 10 people working on the car, so it wouldn't be a problem. The problem is that that's sort of become every car now. As cars have gotten more advanced, like your Honda Civics have gotten to the point now where they have to be taken back to the Honda dealership and plugged into the proprietary Honda computer to analyze what's wrong with them. You can't just pull the carburetor off the car and soak it in carby cleaner overnight. Like it's already getting to the problem where you can't do things like basic oil changes. As the technology has improved, and that has been a good thing, it has meant that the average backyard mechanic can no longer do basic maintenance on their vehicles.
Yeah. And this will be true. The one thing I'm uncertain of, and people bring this up, is that you can't replace plumbers or carpenters with machines, or maybe that's true. I'm not sure.
That's not true. I mean, carpentry in particular, well, specifically cabinet making. If you go to any kitchen cabinet makers now, and you go out the back of their workshop, they will have huge CNC machines where they basically design the kitchen in CAD, and this giant CNC machine will basically cut the whole kitchen out of multi-fiber board, and then that will be transported to the house, and all the quote-unquote carpenters do is screw it all together.
Right.
They've already been replaced.
Yeah, and even in such a scenario where the hand worker, I don't know if we say that in English, Handwerker, I'm just thinking of the German term, but the hand workers, or the man who works with hands, that let's say that is the case. There's the fact that there probably will be some kind of surplus of that type of labor, which will drive down wages for these types of people if everyone's going to become a plumber or carpenter or what have you. So even so, I think we're all in for a rude awakening, and I agree with you that most people who are desperate will display rather despicable behavior, and maybe I'd be one of those people or not. I've often played this scenario in my own head. I would hope I would not be that person who loses principles, but regardless, I think most people don't think about things like that. I think they just act on instinct. And yes, most people would murder, rob, and kill.
I think the problem is, even to the extent that you see these people, and the libertarians are a very strange bunch. Like, I watch some of their videos on YouTube, and they have cartoon characters, and they're always holding guns and surrounded by giant piles of money and stuff, and preaching about these principles, but they don't seem to understand that very few people in this world are libertarians, and even the libertarians that do exist, I don't think they're going to lay down in the middle of the street and die of starvation for their principles. I think when it comes to the 11th hour, people are going to fucking turn into, zombie cannibals if they have to survive.
Most people, yes, I expect. I mean, there are some rather famous examples from the Great Starvation of the Holodomor that took place in Ukraine in the early 20th century, and there are cases of people murdering their own family members to consume their flesh. Yes. And I think it was a doctor. There was some letter. I think it was a woman. She was basically on the verge of madness, debating whether or not, or thinking rather, is she going to devolve into this type of behavior? It's
have you ever heard? Terrible form to bring it up, but have you ever heard that Monty Python skit where they're stuck on the life raft and they're debating who they're going to eat first?
No, I missed that one.
It's brilliant. I don't know if it's on YouTube, but if you're listening to this podcast, go and look it up.
Right.
But I don't want to eat Jimmy. He's got a gammy leg.
Yeah. Well, neither be as it may, I think most people would fall in the category of acting absolutely caddish and unprincipled in an unprincipled manner, and it's in everyone's best interest to prevent that. If the preventive measure that is required for that is something like UBI, and I don't think there's any way around that. Probably, I'm increasingly convinced. Then so be it. And of course, there are other consequences. I've been thinking recently. I was thinking about making a video, but I might as well bring it up here. I recently made a video on unintended consequences. That we create things and we don't really think about what will result from that. I think UBI will have a fascinating and rather gruesome effect on the sexual marketplace, because we already know what happens with welfare and interaction between men and women. If every
it will
person
essentially turn the whole of society into the ghetto, right?
I don't know if it'll turn into the ghetto, but I think that the 80-20 rule will be even more refined, and women who every citizen in this hypothetical model will receive, say, $1,000, $2,000 a month, whatever. Their search for the quote unquote alpha, the Chad guy, is become even more refined because they're going to already have their quote unquote own money, courtesy of the government, and whatever men stand out will be men of just extreme caliber that fall way outside any sort of normative distribution. And I think this exclusion we already see towards the men who fall within a mean in terms of the sexual marketplace, in addition to these men also being exactly the type of men that will not be able to compete economically in a what I refer to as in a cognitive economy. I mean, they're going to be completely screwed over once that takes place.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I see no other way around preventing some sort of mass disruption to society that will bring about violence, other than feeding mouths that will not be able to feed themselves. And
a friend of mine actually said once that, and he basically said, I don't like it, but what you should really think about welfare, and this includes welfare today, what you really need to think about welfare today is that it's the anti-crime tax. I don't necessarily like that a lot of people are on welfare, but I pay taxes and some of that goes to them, and it means they're going to have less incentive to break into my house and steal my television.
That's probably true, I think.
Yeah,
but
again, it's like you can get outraged about it, but it's not necessarily wrong.
Well, and this all goes back to these macro versus micro. The world is a macro problem, and there are certainly issues in your own life that you may or may not be able to have a direct influence on. I recently found out after my doctor's appointment that in the last 15 years I've shrunk a full centimeter. Maybe that's because of my poor posture and my time spent in front of the screen as well. But regardless, I mean, there are things you can't affect or change, and yet, arguably, you can always do more in your own life than wail and worry about the gigantic problems facing society. But here's another point I want to bring up in light of this, Colttaine. I think that there are times when it's better to maybe do almost nothing, not always, than to do something, but there's a facet of human psychology that seems to urge people on consistently to want to take action. Action always needs to be taken. I think it's almost a reflexive aspect of human psychology. There are times when you can neither do, well, you can't do anything, and times when it's just best to let things play out and run their course. But people always need to do something. It always needs to be done. Something needs to be, action needs to be taken. And this is another thing, I think, where we fail as sentient apes in acknowledging that sometimes it's better to let things run their course than to address things directly, even if it's tempting. Because sometimes we've seen what happens when you quote-unquote address problems. Let's go back to the original thing with this example in the United States, that black communities were better off without welfare. People probably should have just left it be. Now it's too late. Example of, I think, state intervention at this stage. And I think originally you probably would have had maybe less crime. In fact, statistically there was. But at this stage, because of welfare dependency and people's inability, I saw a stat, same thing applies to disability. People who get on disability never get off, as in there's a 0% chance of recovering, at least in the United States. That things are so ingrained that now it's too late. The toothpaste is out of the tube, you need to let it be. There might be some things that we're discussing now that are afoot in society right now that we just need to let be. And it's hard to identify what those things are, admittedly, but I think too often we're pushed, or we feel pushed to take action as Hamlet would put it, against a sea of troubles, or take up arms against a sea of troubles. In his case, I don't know if it's always the best idea to do so, and I think in any event, you're a type of, maybe not a role model, but you have a very good, unique personality. I think a well-adapted personality to. Well, I guess your own hedonism and I guess you could say egotism lends itself to being hyper-focused on yourself in a way that I find myself, I struggle doing that, and I know other people struggle doing that. For this reason, and many others, I can publicly say I envy you. But I think we can all take a bit of what is the expression in English? I'm failing to recall the expression in English. I'm thinking of the German. We can also certainly learn something from you in this, or take a page out of your book. Maybe that's the right way of putting it. In this regard, because most people would be more content doing. I mean, you happen to have just a plethora of hobbies. Not everyone has that, but still, working on things that are related to themselves rather than. It's not to say, you can get involved locally in politics, or if you want to make videos about, I'll still occasionally talk about these issues. I don't do it from a place of outrage that's going to give me a premature heart attack. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, look, I don't know. I think people probably should be a lot more focused on the individual. I mean, you can't, like I said, all those things like the alt-right and white nationalists, it's a pipe dream. MRAs, that's a pipe dream. Going back to, the the 1950s or pre sort of nuclear family, that's a pipe dream, like traditionalism. As far as I see it, if you're going to look at what is going to cause, like what's actually going to solve the problems and what is practically feasible, there's essentially only, like for men, there's really only two options that you can sort of look at. There's MGTOW and there's PUA. Those are essentially, as far as I can see, the two things. You either have to go your own way and just reject the system and do your own thing, or you have to learn how to game the system. Those are the only two options I see. I guess choosing between them, it sort of comes down to like it's a balancing of what your values are, as to decide what your best option is there.
Well, I do think that, I need to explain myself when I say this. I do think that, in air quotes, marriage is an option. If people are, hold on, let me explain myself. Not for me, not for you, but if people men are dead set on having children and are willing to accept the cost, and I know a few of these men, subs of mine, I've had conversations with them. They know the deal. They know it's a horrible deal for them. They know it's very risky, but they absolutely want to breed. They're obsessed with it. Then that's what you're going to do. It's just that you have to be aware of those risks and accept them. And when your time comes and you have to pay the piper for it, I expect you to, at the very least, have some bit of stoicism towards it.
Yeah. Well, I would say, like if you have to get married, like if you really, really just have to get married and have to get a wife, like you just need a wife, then like I said, there's two options. You got your MGTOW going your own way, and then you got your PUA. That would be the PUA option. I always credit this to Rollo Tomasi. I think it was him that said it, so I hope I'm not misattributing things, but he came up with the whole thing about marriage game, and the idea that if you get married, you have to like constantly game your wife, right? If you want to go down that path and you want it to work, that's what you've got to do. That is an option. That is something that you can work on. What I said, this comes down to the values and what you want to do, and you have to choose that for yourself, but I don't think it's worth it. I think,
Neither do I.
Like, well, you and I, for example, right? Like I said in my recent video, we're friends, and there's no ulterior motive to our friendship. You know, I don't expect anything more out of you than what our friendship is. If you had to constantly game me to remain a friend, I'm probably not a friend that you want to keep.
Well, that's the whole thing with women. That's why, you know, in insanity. I mean, women, they go through these episodes of pure insanity, and I just don't want to deal with that. I want to hang out, have a relaxed conversation, shoot the shit. Well, I don't know, beer or whatever, but I don't need that in my life, because and if somebody wants that, or they think that the concomitant things that come along with that, like, I don't know, sex or children's work, that's fine. I'm not going to begrudge someone that. But yeah, I agree with you. If you or I were this guy who's always shit testing, there's a reason why men retreat to man caves to hang out and get on the fucking Xbox and chill out, you know? There's a reason.
And look, you know, if you just have to get married and you have to have a wife and kids, that's fine, but that's what you got to do. And I look at it and I'm like, I don't think it's worth it. I don't think, like, I look at that and I'm like, if you have to constantly game someone not to basically fuck you in divorce court, I don't think that's a real relationship. It's certainly not what I would not tolerate that behavior from a male friend. So that's the thing, is like, if you want to, that's your micro solution. If you want to get married and have kids and stuff, you can do that. No thanks. I've got better things to do with my time and energy and resources.
Well, to each his own. So why I say it is an option, but it's an option that, as you pointed out, that you need to be aware of those micro details, and you'll have to micromanage it. There are other things you can do, by the way. I always cite this example, but I remember this is years ago. It's going on 6 or 7 years. Of this guy, I'll never forget him. I don't remember his name. This guy in California, this sort of probably grew up in rural California by the sounds of it. Maybe it was, I don't remember exactly. It might have been a city. You know, sort of standard white American dude who got fed up with quote-unquote feminism. And so he shipped off to the Philippines, settled down in some semi-sizable village town, learned Tagalog, which is the national Tagalog, yes. It's a Polynesian language, national language of. Married some, you know, bumfuck Filipina in the sticks. Never leaves the place. Does some trade between there and Southeast Asia. It's also illegal to divorce in the Philippines still, and so she's tied to his labor, and you know he's kind of stuck there. That'll get your marriage to work too, because it simulates these primitive circumstances that used to exist. You can do that, if you want.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the men that think Southeast Asia is the solution
not Southeast
to all
Asia,
their problems.
specifically the Philippines. You know, you go to some village out in the middle of nowhere.
Well, I know the Philippines. I'm familiar with the Philippines, and it's, I don't know. I mean, I guess it's one of those things where if you've just, like, I get a lot of guys on my channel that are like, oh, move to, like, you know, Philippines, but generally Southeast Asia. I mean, there's a lot of countries like Cambodia and stuff like that where, Vietnam, Thailand, where guys, disaffected Western guys move there thinking that they're going to have the traditionalist dream. And, it's just one of those things where people are pretty much the same everywhere. They will adapt to the economic conditions. So, like, obviously the women in, like, Cambodia, it's harder for them to basically monkey branch to the next best provider, but that doesn't mean that your life there supporting her and her family is going to be any sort of better.
Well, no, and a lot of Japanese and Korean farmers are importing Southeast Asian women because they can't find, I've been over this in videos before. And I also recall this Californian guy, he was starkly and absolutely terrified of the prospect of ever bringing his wife to the United States, because he knows how the environment shapes and molds people. And
was that the guy who did the stuff about Bruffault's law?
He might have at some point in time talked about that, but I don't remember if he had explicitly. I think he and I had some intercourse together, and let's not take social as discussion. Intercourse is such a corrupted word. In any event, I remember having some just interaction with him. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. And but again, he took the most drastic measures possible. Went to one of the few countries where divorce is illegal or very difficult to obtain. Sure, I mean, you could do if it really matters that much to you, just to breed. Okay, and I understand. And I think if it matters that much, then it must surely be worth the risk. Now, there are all kinds of personal objections I have to my own reproduction, but even if I didn't, even if I were objectively a good genetic specimen, just based on my own mentality, I don't think I would want to reproduce. I mean, there are all kinds of reasons why I don't think I should, independent of that. But if there are a lot of men really want that, and so they'll just dive into it. But they need to be aware of, as you pointed out, you get game your wife. And as for these other issues, I don't know. I mean, to me, eventually I want to move away from Germany. I've mentioned Hungary before, although increasingly I've noted, again, back to the personal thing, that one of the things that seems to profoundly affect my sleep is high temperature, accompanied by humidity. So I've noticed this over the years, and I'm thinking long term I'll need to settle a place that, if not latitudinally, has mild climate. So I repeatedly think, well, Ireland is in the teens year round, which is quite good for me. This is an example of thinking about something for yourself. It also has less of a Muslim problem than continental Europe, just as an example. So, I mean, there are things, I think we can all think about things we can improve in our lives. If sometimes we can do things more directly or otherwise, but surely in light of your most recent video, there are better things to run around to than create apparently dozens of sock puppet accounts and harass people and harangue people in the manner that they were doing.
Yeah, well, especially given that the people that they're harassing and stuff is, the you and Turd Flinging Monkey and Barbarossa, people that have done far more than they ever could hope to for the betterment of sort of like men's awareness of what's going on. Like, it's just bullshit, really.
Yeah, and one thing that always puzzles me is people's inexplicable inability to just leave people alone. There are tons of people who I know don't like my content because they think I'm not MGTOW enough, or I've changed, or I've devoted my allegiance to the alt-right, or whatever. Never have taken a minute to actually listen to my words and my stance on things. So that's irrelevant. And I leave them be, and for the most part, they leave me be. I don't watch TFM content, and I know he doesn't watch mine. He doesn't really consider my content good. He's gone on record. Even with him making a statement like that, I don't need to attack the guy or whatever. I just live and let live.
Yeah.
And that's another thing that in the current atmosphere, this need to attack everybody just because you don't agree or get along is absolutely baffling to me, because I am perfectly content to live my life on my own terms and let other people who don't necessarily have similar views or even find my views intolerable — I think I have pretty mild views, but whatever — to just get on with things.
Yeah. Well, and I feel the same. I mean, to the extent that I have had actual beefs with people, like, for instance, alternative hypothesis. Yeah. I said my piece. I put my video out there and I moved on. I'm not making I'm not making 20 fucking sock puppets and constantly harassing the guy. And he's not doing it, as far as he's concerned, at least to my knowledge. He's fuck Colttaine, and he's moved on. So I don't know. It's just I don't understand that mentality. I don't know. People have too much time on their hands,
really either. And I again, I have no problem letting people do their own thing. I tend not to be offended by very much. There's tons of content on YouTube that I don't fancy. Again, TFM has never resonated with me, and I know that my content doesn't resonate with him. But that's okay. I don't need to. And even people, I've had a number of very pleasant, nice conversations with Human. As a rule, I rarely watch his videos. Sometimes I do, because they're just not for me. But it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of the same. I like some of his stuff. His stuff is kind of more emotional for me, I guess. Kind of like Spetsnaz. I know a lot of people love Spetsnaz's stuff, and for me, I just, like, I know, I get why other people liked it, and I got no problem with him or what he said, but it's just, Spetsnaz just didn't really, it just wasn't stuff that I'd sort of enjoyably spend 20 minutes watching.
And that's the beauty of YouTube, that you can delve into the channels and things that most interest you, that you find most common ground with, or that resonate with you. What I think is actually a reflection of this, of, you could say, the intolerance abroad, which is to say in society at large, everyone's seeming intrinsic need to leap at each person's throat that may or may not agree with the other person. I mean, we see this all the time with the SJWs. I just, my philosophy at the end of the day, in some sense, is just leave me the fuck aloneism. I will do my thing. I will not interfere with your life. Kindly repay me that favor, and we will get along fabulously, in as much as we don't have that much interaction or intercourse. And I think that this would be a fantastic model. I don't see. Everyone tries to find something to nitpick at or attack, and I don't understand it really necessarily, because most of the things that people attack are just, how should I put it? Tastes and opinions.
Well, it's not even just that. I think a lot of the time as well, people basically arrive at the worst possible interpretation of what you've said.
Like, look no further, Colttaine. The alt-right, the National Socialist Stardust. Yeah.
Well, as an example, as a perfect example, on the video that I just made, there's a part in it where I'm like, I'm just like, go play video games, go ride motorcycles, go eat pizza. And there's a guy in the comments.
I saw that. Yeah.
He was joking, or at least, this is the internet, so I fucking hope that he was joking. But
about gut health and dairy? Yes, I read it.
Yeah, he's like, recommending that people eat pizza is bad. And, if you get fat or unhealthy, you can blame Colttaine for giving this advice. Now, that was a joke, or at least I hope so, but I think it is indicative of Poe's law. Yeah, but I think it is indicative of a wider sort of cognitive behavior, where if you say something like go and eat a pizza, people on the internet will interpret that to mean that you are suggesting people eat pizza for breakfast, lunch and dinner 7 days a week.
Yeah, or my example, and this is I think why people incorrectly term or call me alt-right, is I publicly have had discussions and I've made videos about population differences. Some going in great depth, like the one on collectivist society in East Asia, and I think they obviously have consequences in terms of performance in sport, and I think they probably have consequences in terms of economic, and we know IQ is correlated with economic outcomes. And so acknowledging that, and even having discussions about it, automatically turns me into Dr. Mengele or whatever, the worst possible interpretation.
Yeah.
Which is incidentally what happened to Charles Murray throughout the years after he published The Bell Curve, which apparently it's one I read that book years ago, but if I recall, it's one chapter.
Well. I actually read that.
Yeah, one chapter in a gigantic book covering other things. But people are just looking to grab you by the throat and just and call you whatever. And I think that one of my most recent video that I try to explain my positions on belief and how things change is that YouTube in of itself is a very strange ecosystem, because once you align yourself with what's viewed as a faction, they don't call themselves that, you're expected from that day on out for the rest of your life till you drop dead to only be an exponent and representative of whatever is aligned with that faction. If you deviate, if you express an interest in other things, the gods have mercy on your soul. You are a heretic. And this is something I've noticed as I make videos covering a wide range of subjects, and increasingly not, you could say, MGTOW related, or directly related at least. And this is because I have more than one intellectual interest, shocking as it sounds. If people want my channel to exist in some capacity, well, I can't just talk about MGTOW. I'll go insane, and yet that's viewed as heresy. That's a very internet-specific thing, though, I think. You have a channel that talks about one thing, and deviations from it. I actually know a few alt-right channels that would like to talk about other stuff, but they can't because they've been pigeonholed into this corner, as an example, as well.
Yeah, well, it's one of those things where I get accused of all sorts of things. The left-wingers accuse me of being a right-wing fascist, and the right-wingers accuse me of being a left-wing socialist. And it's one of those things where the internet's a very polarizing place. It's very difficult to have a nuanced position where you think the free market's great for some things, but socialized public services are better for others. Like it's very difficult to have a nuanced position.
Yeah, absolutely. I have struggled. Well, I try to present one. There are many issues I'm not sure about, and people want certitude. They want you to represent their brand name, and YouTube is all about brand names. Minor disagreements are never really minor because it's always some huge thing. And I think, in as much as on a macro level, discussion between people of different views is useful, I think it is a useful tool. We could make a lot more progress on that front if people would be willing to just be a little less rabid and aggressive and just accept, for example, I didn't even know this recently, the Distributus, who is a guy who makes interesting videos, he's a Catholic guy, as in wears it on the sleeve and is interested in that sort of thing, made a response video to an older video, and I've talked to him on my channel before, and I'm happy to have another discussion with him about certain things. There'll be some overlap and probably a lot of disagreement, but this need to just attack everything that doesn't sync with your worldview it's on the internet in particular, because in the internet you don't need to get. That's the other thing. If you're not face to face, you don't need to get along. You don't need to make an attempt. It's just easy just to leash the dogs. Unleash the dogs. It's why, for the record, I just don't like ever interacting in the comment section as a rule. Sometimes I do. In fact, I actually left a somewhat autistic comment on your video correcting somebody's linguistic classification there, but be it as it may.
Was that? Yeah, that was about, was it British and American English?
No, that was a separate comment. A guy described German as an agglutinative language, which is incorrect in a technical sense, and he snarkily, perhaps correctly, thanked me for my unsolicited pedantry. But as a rule, I don't respond to comments, and it's particularly comments where people are just deliberately trying to misunderstand me, or even not so deliberately. It's a shit show, and there's no point. There's nothing productive ever came of interacting in comment sections. If you,
well, I think
ever.
Yeah, one of the things with comments is that you can spend, like that one equal contribution video. I mean, that was an hour and 20 minutes, and there was fucking tons and tons of data in that. Like, when you consider the research and writing the script and then actually recording the voice and doing all the graphics and stuff for that video, that probably took over 100 hours to make that video. But it takes 30 seconds to type a comment. It takes 30 seconds to type a stupid comment, basically pointing to some SJW misinformation. So it's like, yeah, the investment in time, the investment of time and energy in a comment section is far lower. The barrier to entry in the comment section is much lower than actually making the video that people are commenting on.
Absolutely, and I think that endows people with a sense of disproportionate power, and I think people don't, especially your type of videos, which require a lot of graphical attention, they have no sense of the amount of time and energy and required to make them. But again, I think your approach of just focusing on yourself is one that is increasingly attractive to me, even to other people. I recently was talking to Reactionary Expat about just focusing more on one's personal life rather than getting bogged down in the macro problems. And I need to talk more to him, but he largely agrees, because it's just, there's only so much you can do. And I've made my peace with the people who are going to hurl epithets at me and call me all sorts of unfounded things, or give unfounded descriptions to my views, because they were never intent on understanding my position regardless. If people really want to know my view, I'll offer it, but it might not be to their liking, and then so be it. But I think something that could really help is focus on yourself and just let people be. Why this compulsive need to attack people for views that differ from your own? I could understand if there's some direct interference there, but
well, I can even understand a disagreement of ideas, like with the alt-right. I made my videos, I moved on. I don't understand things like running 20-odd sock puppets. Like I said, I am really, really fucking suspicious of people that have an agenda. Like, I don't have an agenda. I just make videos about shit that I'm interested in. And, I'm not trying to change the world. I'm not trying to, bash other people into agreeing with me. I just kind of put my shit out and, that's that. But I just, I'm really, really deeply, and you know what it is? It's the same. These people are the internet version of those people that turn, like those Antifa fucking idiots that turn up and like when Sargon and Milo Yiannopoulos and stuff do talks at universities and stuff, and they turn up and basically stand at the back and try to, make noise and disrupt the whole presentation.
No.
It's like, I get that you don't like Sargon of Akkad, but what are you doing there basically disrupting it for everyone else? Like, just it's not the way that civil discussions are conducted.
Yeah, well, I think this is the problem, because everyone's become so intolerant. You can't even have a conversation anymore.
Intolerant and entitled. It's not just that they're intolerant, it's that they think they're entitled to disrupt you from hearing other people speak.
Absolutely. And I this is something I can't get on board with. I'm very much a live and let live kind of guy, although I certainly have views some might view as I guess strong views, or views that pull one way or the other. I'd like to be left alone. I generally make videos about things that interest me, or I find might have be of interest to the audience. But I'm certainly not the great redeemer. I'm not, as the Germans would say, the Heiland. That's the Redeemer in German. And I never claimed to be. I noticed this. People attacked me in the distributed sort of response video to me. Stardust offers some interesting points and blah blah blah, but he's only speaking in probabilities. He's not after the absolute truth. He's not trying to fix everything. Well, I mean, perhaps that's the case, but I've never claimed to be. And maybe some of the things I observe may be helpful to a few individuals. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the fix. If anything might be achievable, I'd like to see a greater tolerance. Now, the issue here, I think, and what reason why it's not going to happen is: you've heard of this term blood sport?
The Colttaine, yeah.
No. YouTube blood sport.
Yeah, Colttaine. It was.
Right.
And it's basically it's from a Jean-Paul Van Damme film called.
I know blood sport. Yeah, I know. I know, but I'm talking about as it manifests itself on YouTube.
I don't know.
I don't pay attention for the most part, but.
It all seems a bit posturing to me. But
people do like drama. Yes, it is. It's an enormous display of posturing, and the peacock displaying his stupendous plumage. But the problem increasingly on YouTube is that, sure, drama has always been a thing, but it seems to be the meat and drink and veritable sustenance of huge swaths of the YouTube community. As the point where they enjoy it a lot more than any other type of content. So it's better to say something super edgy or have a bunch of people fight than even try to reach any kind of accord. And I find that baffling because I just find that draining. I'd rather have a discussion where there's some always polite disagreement, agreement, and that's more helpful than people just screaming at each other and trying to one-up each other. But people find that entertaining, and what's worse, that type of behavior seems to be well remunerated, in the sense that ever since Jean-Francois, who used to make reasonably interesting videos about more diverse topics, and
I'm vaguely familiar with
JF, right, about specific. I mean, I can see the appeal, but he's gone whole hog. Is that an expression, or is that just borrowed from Overwatch? Anyway, he's gone whole hog.
It's an expression.
Okay, yeah. There's a thing in Overwatch where it's called whole hog, where Roadhog blasts everyone with his junk gun, and I've lost track of the English language. So there you go. Everyone goes whole hog on that, and he's gone there, and because people dump huge amounts of money his way just to have these drama-based discussions. Some of them are informative, but I would say it's kind of 50-50. But if that's what people are going to pay for, that's what the market's going to gravitate towards, which is basically drama.
Yeah. Well, I remember. I mean, it's. I don't really watch the guy, but I've heard similar things about like Andy Warski and stuff. I remember Tildia saying ages and ages ago, and he hasn't done one in fucking forever, but I remember him saying that as much as he always hated doing them, the video responses that he did to like Lacey Green were always his biggest viewer number videos.
Oh yeah.
I mean, when you consider, like, I actually just typed it in to bring it up and check. The video channel Drama Alert on YouTube has like almost just under 4 million subscribers. People like drama.
Yeah, and I think ultimately it's to our detriment, that is, as humans as a species. But if that's the type of content that's well remunerated, it's not surprising that many people will drift that way.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's actually, I don't think it's even just that it's people like drama. I think it's also the fact, and this is why reality TV is so prolific these days, is that it's a very cheap genre to create. it's a lot easier to make a drama response video than it is to create something from scratch. Like even this, like the video that I just made is kind of a drama film and kind of a response film, and I put a lot of effort into my videos, but it was still, even though it was longer, it was still a lot easier to create the most recent one that I did. Like it was easier to create that than it was to create the one about the astronauts in Alexandria burning and stuff, because that required actually, you know, going and finding articles talking about, you know, the average cost of marriage and shoes and, you know, like the number of astronauts that have gone to the moon. Like there's drama videos are relatively low cost, high return, to be honest.
Yep, unfortunately. And also, the other thing I've noticed is that, speaking of nuanced positions, that if you buy into if at least you're advertising a certain faction on YouTube and it's profitable, then it's a lot easier to do that. And for example, the Anthony Bourdain suicide. I mean, a lot of people, I offer an analysis. A lot of people, I mean, JF did a discussion of it, and I thought the analysis was just pretty poor in explaining what had happened with the man overall. But whether he believes it or not, I think he made that analysis and offered the discussion, in a certain light, because that's what his current audience finds most pleasing, rather than mentioning some very salient factors such as the cheating girlfriend, other issues, neurochemical issues. I understand why people do this sort of thing, and they get involved in the drama and presenting unilateral views on things, but I just don't see that as being really healthy. I cannot sign up on that, and it's not, certainly not my style. I guess for that reason, I shall always remain in the shadows of obscurity. But I would rather remain in the shadows of obscurity and stick to my principles. And I think it's better to be tolerant and try to look at issues from multiple perspectives than just jumping on some bandwagon and run away with it. And that's what I have to say on that. You know, I just is the way it is. So.
Yeah, but I don't know. That's my whole thing. It is the way it is. The world is the way it is. As long as you got to face what's in front of you, you may as well attempt to make the best choices you can to maximize what's going to be good for your life.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to be able to live with yourself. I don't think I can live with myself as some frothing at the mouth ideologue, especially if I turned into some sort of thespian doing it. I tend to wear my mind and heart on my sleeve, and so I don't. If I just pretended to, I couldn't do it. It's why I stopped making. The majority of movies aren't about MGTOWs. I just my heart and mind wasn't really with it anymore, so I stopped. I mean, I'm not going to be that guy who's going to. So I think there's actually value in Polonius's words as he sees his son off Laertes and Hamlet. He says, "To thy own self be true, and in doing so thou canst be false to no one." I think that's another important thing. I mean, whatever seeming benefit there might be in jumping on some bandwagon because you think it might be profitable or it makes you feel good, for me at least, it's important that I'm able to live myself with some set of principles that I've established for myself, and that's why I'm not going to ever get into the drama. And admittedly, I actually made a mistake in my YouTube time once. I did once at some point in time, and I regret it, go on the attack with regards to Sandman. Now, I don't like Sandman's content at all, and I want nothing to do with the guy. But whether I was correct or not, is irrelevant. I think, let him do his thing. And I think that was probably it was my only major learning point there, but because it was the only time I actually went out on the attack. But I shouldn't have done it. It was a pointless exercise, and I do regret it. But I realized
it was a pointless exercise, but not without its irony when Sandman basically turned around and made the same complaints against Angry MGTOW.
Well, yes, that was funny. Yeah, that was pretty funny. Yeah. That was absolutely hysterical. I think the irony wasn't lost to him either on that front. But I that was funny. But still, whatever. People have different lanes, and I've learned my lesson, and so I think the lesson to be learned here is probably not the best use of your time making 20 different sock puppet accounts. Probably not. Probably don't get too upset about the sky falling, because it's not, in as much as the sky has always been falling. That's just a condition of the world. It's a condition of the heavens. So it's common term as that.
It's just it's a condition of the condition of just nature. I actually find it very strange, because one of the biggest things that I always scratch my head about when it comes to PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, they love to carry on about how it's completely unethical to keep animals as pets, and they should all be out in the wild or whatever. And I'm like, if I hypothetically, if the Buddhists are right and reincarnation's a thing, I want to come back as one of the Queen's lapdogs or something. Because honestly, the natural world, if you're an animal living in the natural world wondering where your next meal's going to come from, that's fucking hard stuff. Pets are fed basically, they live a fairly luxurious life, sitting around on the couch all day, hand to mouth, they're always fed.
Oh yeah, you should see, those are some of the most popular videos. Some silly video about a dog and his quote-unquote mother, as in the female owner, who's pampering him and treating him like the godchild. And pets have it a lot better than animals have it in the natural world, out in the wild. Absolutely.
And it's I don't know. I think PETA are definitely that's not a good point that they argue on the basis of there. But
well, I guess you could do some mental gymnastics there, and they would say something along the lines of, well, at least it's nature or some such. But
well, the whole point of civilization is kind of to subvert nature, to be honest. But I don't know. I just think, the world is the way it is. Just try and make the best decisions you can to maximize what's going to be good for you. Yeah, and I
agree with that. You do what you can within your limits, and try not to get upset about things that are beyond you. I think that's the best way to approach things. It doesn't mean you can't talk about it, but it just means that it's not going to become the focal point of your life such that it's destroying you from the inside out. And I think oftentimes people this is something that baffles me oftentimes about the alt-right, is the discussion about the demographics of white people or white Europeans. I'm just thinking, well, go out and just reproduce white. Have lots of white get married. I mean, that's a solution to that, right? You can contribute.
Yeah.
Just do it. Why spend your time in a comment section talking about it?
Well, this is one of the things. I mean, the video that I made was kind of addressing these pro-male guys, but the same arguments could be made to the alt-right or white nationalists. I mean, they're never going to get their ethno-state.
No, but what they can do is fuck white women and have lots of white babies if they really wanted that, right?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, out in public spaces, in the workplace, you're always going to have to deal with people that you don't like. I don't like other white people. There's plenty of other white males I don't like. But if you don't like black people, you don't have to hang out with them in your free time. You don't have to invite them around to your house to watch movies with you.
Yeah.
It's
and you can marry a white woman. You can have 5 children, all white European if you want. There's no. I mean, there are obstacles. Obviously, there are obstacles for everything. But if that's what your line, if your main thing is white people are dying out, then go be the change you want to be. Go inseminate a white woman, get married, do the whole 9 yards. It'll be more productive than screaming or writing comments in the YouTube comment section.
Yeah.
So this applies to just about everybody, I think. But it bears noting down on this particular point. But I've been at it for a while. I think the takeaway from this is cheesy as it is, be the change you want to be.
Yeah.
And
or as I put it in my video, stop being such a fuckwit and take control of your own life.
The wrath of Colttaine writ large.
Yeah.
That was a very wrathful video, you could say.
Yeah, I don't know. These guys, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's understandable. It's certainly an odd contingent of people, or one person, or however you want to put it. Well, everyone, thanks for tuning in. Possibly on my end, more to come. See how my health holds up. And whenever Colttaine feels like making a video, I'm sure he will, because that's just the sort of guy he is.
Yeah. We'll see. We shall see.
If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.